The Portfolio Composer, episode 214.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach, Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
Composers, at least in the United States right now, it is a very entrepreneurial job. And most people, they love music, they love writing music, they love film music. That's why they want to do this. And they will probably never have a successful career because they completely suck at the business side of what they're doing. They don't manage people very well. They don't manage teams very well. Composers, and I've had to get much better at this over the years, tend to be hermits. We tend to go into our composer caves and not interact with people. And we speak through our music and through our art.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Just released, Dorico Pro 2 is a major new version, including features for musicians working in film and TV music and in jazz, rock, and pop. Steinberg have also released Dorico Elements, a new entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show. Hello, and welcome to episode 214 of the Portfolio Composer podcast. I'm your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope. Today's episode is with composer and conductor Brian Ralston. He has spent the past 15 years creating compelling melodic tracks that inspire audiences. His creative gifts lend themselves to an extremely rich sound that can be felt throughout his works. Ralston's recent credits include Being Rose, starring Sybil Shepherd and James Brolin, and 20th Century Fox's Crooked Arrows, directed by Steve Rash. Ralston also serves as an instructor for the UCLA film scoring program, and he hosts his own podcast called the Scorecast Podcast. You're going to get a lot out of this. Enjoy. Brian, welcome to the Portfolio Composer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So the name The Portfolio Composer comes from the idea from the business and investing world of diversifying income streams.
Mm-hmm.
And as composers in the 21st century and as freelancers, that's really what we have to do. We write music, but sometimes we also teach or we perform multiple things. So I wanted to ask you, what's in your portfolio?
I think, like you said, diversity is important. I not only write music for films and occasional TV films or TV projects, but I also do some concert music. I also do little arranging projects in the background. I have a lot of band director friends from college that have remained close friends of mine, and they're spread throughout the United States. And I've actually done marching band shows for high schools, which is a whole nother mindset and a whole nother thing to do. And I'm a trumpet player by trade. So writing for brass and writing for bands and wind bands and everything else is a separate interest of mine that I think is just really cool. I would actually love to score a film one day with nothing but a wind band. I think that would be an interesting color choice to use. So doing stuff like that, I'm also now, believe it or not, getting into producing movies. I think once you're in Hollywood, I've always seen film composing and film composers like filmmakers. They just are filmmakers that happen to understand the language of music. And in order to write an effective score, you have to write, understand character arc and understand story arc and story structure and where things are going and how that fits into it. And then you almost kind of not only support the story, but tell that story through music. And I think the best film composers and the best film scores are really done by composers who understand filmmaking. So it's kind of a natural progression, I think, to learn more about films as you work in them and to want to be involved in that. The other aspect to composing is that you're producing really the score, you're producing the music department stuff. And that's a lot of jobs beyond writing notes.
Right.
It's managing teams of people, it's managing budgets, it's a lot of different stuff. And it kind of gives naturally to, in a way, wanting to produce. I do tend to be the guy that everybody asks to solve problems or solves problems pretty well. I'm pretty even keeled. I may be freaking out on the inside, but you would never know it on the outside. So people tend to be a little calm around me when the crap is hitting the fan. And so And those are all qualities that are very valuable to our producer in general. So I've produced in the past. I'm starting to get into it more. I have another project a film that I'm producing now. We've made a short film, and it's a proof of concept to get a feature film made with one of my director friends. I did do the score for it as well, of course. And we scored it with a live orchestra, recorded at Warner Brothers, actually, which is rare for a short film to have that kind of a score. But of course, me being the producer, me putting the budget together and even putting money into the project and everything else, I had, I guess, a little bit more say over how the music budget was going to be spent. So, it's a combination of things. And if that ultimately in my career, I mean, composing will always be my main thing. That will always be my focus. That's my passion. That's where my heart is. That's how I see story. And it's the art that I want to express. But, if between composing projects, if I end up producing stuff more often, it seems to be where my path is leading me.
So you're composing, you're producing, and what else are you doing?
You could say that I'm raising my daughter.
That's a full-time job by itself.
Which is a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been together 14 years, married 9 of them, but we dated for 5 years before we were born, before Maddie was born. Me having my studio space at home, which is detached from the house, but it is its own space. I think it's important to have a work environment that you go to that feels kind of separate from your home environment. And it's at home. I can walk out here in my sweatpants and get work done, but it's also not just down the hall where, I close a door and there's the distractions of the house getting in my way. So it is a separate office space, a studio space. But, my wife has the traditional corporate job, the 9 to 5 go into work thing. So when our daughter was, young enough to not be in school yet, I pretty much was the Mr. Mom during the day, and I would do my music at night. And my wife Heather would come home and we would tag team and go, "Okay, I'm out, you're in," and I would go out to the studio and get my work done. And looking back on the last 5, 6 years, I sometimes don't know when I slept, but at the same time, we somehow made it work. And it's getting easier now because our daughter's in school and during the day. So I have my days back where I can take meetings and, even do things like this and certainly write notes during the day, which is good. But at the same time, I'm more creative at night. So frequently during the day, I'm conducting other business other than music, working on the website or updating stuff or dealing with if I'm producing something, other producing issues behind the scenes. And musical ideas tend to come to me probably late afternoon into the evening. And after having some dinner, then I'll work on them until, the rest of the evening until 3 a.m. That has always been that way for whatever reason, just more creative at night.
As long as you know what works for you, right? That's a big part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody has the way to get through. So
yeah. And you also teach at UCLA in the film scoring program, yes?
I do. I currently teach their Business of Film Music class, which is a requirement in their film scoring certificate program. It's not a full-time job. I teach one class of that each spring quarter and each fall quarter, which is 3 hours every currently Wednesday evening. And most of that class is about bringing in guests from the industry. I bring in managers and directors and producers and publicists and tax professionals and everybody else that composers work with other than, and I do bring in other composers, but the whole point of that class is to talk about everything but the notes.
Right.
All the other stuff.
Yeah.
Forming an LLC, tax stuff, write-offs, website, how to write your bio, just all the other business aspects of what a composer needs to do.
Yeah. So as you've been doing this, assuming you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, about 8 years, 7, 8 years, something like that.
So you've had many students come through your class.
Yeah.
What has been one of the most surprising things as you've worked with students that they didn't quite get? And I asked that question coming from an academic background.
Yep.
I have a doctorate in music. I was going to teach at university, and I just followed that path the whole way. And so now you have these students who have gone to school. They want to be film composers, and they're there to make movies.
Yeah.
And what are they surprised by?
There's probably a few things. I think the biggest thing is that composers, at least in the United States right now, it is a very entrepreneurial job.
Yes.
And most people, they love music. They love writing music. They love film music. That's why they want to do this. And they will probably never have a successful career because they completely suck at the business side of what they're doing. They don't manage people very well. They don't manage teams very well. Composers, and I find fault with this, so I've had to get much better at this over the years, tend to be hermits. We tend to go into our composer caves and not interact with people. And we speak through our music and through our art. And film composing and media composing is a very collaborative team sport. We're writing what the director wants, not necessarily what we want. But we're the one that has the skill set to solve that musical problem. And the running of the business, forming an LLC or an S Corp or something like that to work your business under and to get paid through the business, understanding contracts and legal language, what is a work for hire agreement?
Mm-hmm.
People don't understand what that is or what that means. And they don't understand what their options are. Can I license this music instead of sign a work for hire agreement? Well, yeah, you can. And what does that mean? And all these other aspects that people don't understand that could ruin their career before it even starts because they need to be better at the business side of things.
Yeah.
I really encourage people to learn the business side of things, to even take a business class, to understand how contracts work, to understand, certainly in the United States, the differences between independent contractors and employees,
Mm-hmm.
and the difference between getting paid on a W-2 versus a 1099 and what that means.
Yes.
There's certain court cases that are ingrained in the history of how composers have been defined as independent contractors by the Department of Labor. If they go back and look at the Elmer Bernstein case, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, this Supreme Court case that got kicked back down to the Department of Labor. And composers did this to themselves, by the way. Many years ago, composers used to be unionized and composers used to be on staff at a studio and they would score everything coming down from that studio. So you were a Fox composer, let's say.
Like Alfred Newman.
Yeah, Alfred Newman or Bernard Herrmann or whatever. You were a Fox composer and everything Fox did, they would come down the pipe and that's what you would be scoring. And you would do it on the Fox stage. And they had a handful of people on staff and, whoever was available would take the next film. And that's how you scored your films. Over the years, that has changed where composers started not being on staff anymore, not working in an office, not being provided a space to work, but working at home, working more independently. Certainly, some of the TV days in the 80s and 90s started these things called package deals, where people would get paid a chunk of money and said, instead of paying you a composing fee, and then we'll pay everybody else and the musicians and the engineers or whatever separately, we're going to give you the composer 30 grand or 50 grand, but you have to pay the orchestra. So now you're the composer managing a budget that, if you hire a large orchestra and you spend 40 grand on the orchestra, you get to go home with 10 grand as your composing fee. Or you could spend 50 grand on a larger orchestra and take no money. Or you could spend 20 grand on a much smaller eclectic ensemble, record that and go home with 30 grand. So you as the composer are managing that package a lot more. And the way that we work changed, led to some court cases where composers really wanted more control over the music that they were writing. And they wanted to be able to say, Elmer Bernstein wanted to be able to take a suite of music from To Kill a Mockingbird and go have a concert with it with, say, I'm making all this up for the sake of argument.
Sure.
Like the LA Phil or the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. And yet that music he didn't own, the film studio owned and controlled and could say, no, you can't do that. And he went to court arguing that, no, we should have the right to do concert arrangements and works and suites and derivative works of our own compositional material for other avenues, for other things. And the argument was made that, look, we're not employees. We don't work like this anymore. I work at home. I'm independent. And guess what? The composers won the argument ultimately. So we won. But, you can argue we also lost the war because that declaration of composers winning that argument that we are independent contractors, now that sets precedent.
Yeah.
And now, independent contractors cannot unionize. Only employees can unionize.
And it has tax implications.
Absolutely, because we get paid on a 1099,
right,
which doesn't have taxes taken out. So now you're forming an LLC or you're forming an official business with whatever state you're in to conduct a business and you're taxed differently. And you want to do that under the business because businesses are taxed at different rates than an individual. And of course, you also want to create a corporate veil because, we're dealing with intellectual property issues.
Mm-hmm.
People get sued all the time for, you stole my work. No, I didn't. And you don't want people coming after your house because they claim your theme is too close to theirs on some movie, for some piece of music you wrote. So you want to be working under the corporate veil of your business to kind of protect your person and your personal assets from things.
Yeah.
So that's even another reason right there to do it. Recent tax law passed in the United States here in 2018, 2019, a lot of deductions that people were doing as individuals, you can no longer do as individual.
Right.
They took those deductions away. Now they increased the standard deduction to pretty much compensate for that. But there are certain businesses or certain things that has affected. Teachers can no longer write off, when they go out and supplement their classroom stuff with extra crayons and extra construction paper and other things that they do. They used to be able to just write that off, but now they can't.
Yeah.
Because as employees, they can't. And the same thing for musicians. I mean, private, personal musicians would write off the expenses to take care of their instruments, and composers would write off the expense of buying a new keyboard or buying a piano or upgrading their studio gear. And they can't do that as an individual. But you know what? You can do that. None of those deductions went away if you're a business, if you're an LLC.
Absolutely.
So the benefit is to now, to really embrace the independent contractor, the entrepreneurial business that you are, and to form a business, form an LLC. And then you can get into these scenarios where you can still write all that stuff off because you are a business. And in a way, I don't entirely disagree with it. I mean, if you're a business, you should be a business, And so there's a lot of reasons to benefit. But this whole difference between, how composers used to work and how we work today and how that's changed, I guess part of that decision is confusing because as independent contractors, we inherently own the copyright of what we do. And this was part of the argument as well. It's like we create intellectual property that we own. Until we sign it away, we own it. Well, studios today and production companies, even independent ones, pretty much will only work with you if you sign a work for hire agreement.
Right.
And a work for hire agreement is doing two things. It's putting you in as not an independent contractor anymore. It's making you work as an employee. And it's making the employer the writer or creator of the work.
Mm-hmm.
I always equate this to like the coder at Apple Computer. The guy who's sitting down and coding how an iPhone works does not own the code. Apple does.
Right.
And copyright forms and everything else, Apple is the creator of the code, not John Smith, who actually wrote it down the hall in Office 312. So that's what a work for hire agreement does, is it makes you an employee and it makes you give up ownership and even authorship of what you're creating, i.e. the film score. And then in our composer contracts, you negotiate the credit back in the same agreement.
Yeah.
And so that you get, music by John Williams or whatever. So you get that credit back. But, that's not the only way. I mean, on smaller independent films, you can theoretically license a film. I mean, you can treat it no different than a song licensed for any other project and say, okay, I'm going to write this entire score. I will own it because you're paying me, $20 to write this score for this small independent film.
Mm-hmm.
Let me own it. Let me manage it. And I will license it to you for that $20. And then hopefully you can create a little bit more income on the back end over the long term as it plays on HBO, Showtime, whatever.
That's what I've done with the independent films I've scored.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Aaron Perrine, and I'm a composer and a conductor. I have found that it has drastically improved my workflow. I feel like far less editing and engraving necessary with Dorico. It's just so intuitive when you kind of wrap your head around how it handles things. And just understanding how it works globally. Everything is done globally. So now if I ever want to make a change, I have to think about it. Okay, how would I do this, behind the scenes? What really attracted me, and actually my first piece that I wrote in Dorico was a saxophone concerto. And I was attracted to the flows, the way it can handle a multi-movement piece so effortlessly. And I thought, well, and that was maybe a crazy one to jump into. I should have probably done, that was a 20-minute piece. I should have probably done something a little smaller. But that forced me to learn program quite well. So I had to learn many, many, many things in the midst of that one. But there's a great forum, and there's just a lot of support online. Anytime if you have a question, there's people you can reach out to that you'll get answers. It's just time is money. I mean, it's for me, it's that simple. I spend more time writing music and less time fighting with a notation program. I feel like the notation program is just simply it just should be a tool to best express yourself as a composer. If you're actually in the middle of a piece, I feel like it's so much easier in Dorico to make quick changes as far as like inserting music, moving music around, the use of all the filters. I mean, there's just a variety of things that I feel like it frees you up And you can still, you're not set in stone. You're not committed to a meter. You're not committed to, really anything. Where I feel like other programs I felt kind of locked in, and it was a big undertaking. If I wanted to change, I want this to be a 3/4 bar here, and I want to move this phrase by, half note or whatever. I feel like in Dorico that it's so much more fluid. I would recommend Dorico because I feel like it is the most cutting edge notational program on the market. What is most amazing maybe is just the rate at which this program has grown up and matured over these past few years. And to me, that's the most exciting because there's really no perfect program on the market yet. To me, this is as close as I've found. There's things I'm certainly looking forward to that I know will be in future editions, but just the speed at which they've handled those things is pretty incredible. So I would definitely recommend.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. So almost 8 years ago, you published a blog post, 10 lessons on breaking in.
Yep.
So let's just review these. And then I want to ask, what would you add or change?
Okay.
So for people who haven't read the blog post, and I'll put a link in the show notes, your first item was, you have to break into the business of tomorrow, not the business of today.
Mm-hmm.
Then everyone's path is different. Set a precedent as department head. And this is what you were referring to earlier, that when you are, especially when you're taking a package deal, you're managing everything related to the score.
Yep.
4, main title on-screen credits matter the most. So if your name doesn't get on the screen, people don't know you did it. Recommendations are key. Entertainment industry is a business of relationships. Be a good listener and be a good communicator.
Mm-hmm.
8, be production friendly. 9, you must be well-rounded in your skills. And for those of you who haven't read it, Brian goes in and provides really good examples of why these are important and fleshes it out. And then 10, refer back to number 1, which was, you have to break into the business of tomorrow, not the business of today.
Yep.
Now, you wrote this almost a decade ago.
Yep.
What would you change, if anything?
The industry has certainly changed in a decade. And what I think has changed about that most is a couple things. One, at that time when I wrote it, and I still believe all those things principally. I mean, I really do. But at that time when I wrote it, there was definitely the way composers work, the team scoring method, however you want to call it. Hans Zimmer really started this in Media Ventures, which became Remote Control, where there'd be a lot of people, a lot of additional music composers on a project. It's a Hans Zimmer score. Hans Zimmer is controlling that every note of that score, but it gets fleshed out to ancillary scenes and ancillary cues in that movie, gets fleshed out to a bunch of other composers who contribute to this and write those cues. And, and then of course they go back to Hans and he either gets to approve it or not approve it or suggest changes. And then it goes back and it goes through many revisions. That process has certainly changed. And I think our industry, because of that, has become a little bit more apprentice-like, and becoming someone's assistant and doing additional music doesn't have the stigma it used to have, right? And so I used to see, and I would used to believe that if it didn't say music by your name, the credit didn't matter at all. And I think now, though, people are understanding, producers and studios are understanding how that team method works. And whether you agree with it or not, or want to be a part of it or not, that's not ultimately what I'm saying. Is just that the stigma around it is not as negative as it used to be. People get it. People get if you need 100 hours of score in 1 week, one person cannot do that. And so you need to have a team of people to flesh that out, including other composers, not just orchestrators, but other composers and other people that are all working towards a common goal. And so I chose my path to not really follow the assistant route in this town. I really felt that being a bigger fish in a smaller pond at the time was a better option for me. And that's the bet I made, and that's the bet I've had to lay in. But I think if I were starting out today, I wouldn't be so adverse to becoming someone's assistant or learning under the tutelage of another bigger composer, because I think those times have changed. So that's probably the biggest thing I would change. It doesn't make what I said wrong, because I said on-screen credits matter most. And that is still true because an agent or a manager or a music supervisor, the first question they're going to say if your name gets pitched somewhere is, well, what have they done? And if they haven't heard of that project, then you're not going to be considered. But someone might say, oh, well, they did additional music on Avengers or something like that. Oh, okay. Well, let me see what they've done because they now worked on a big tentpole movie in some way, in some capacity, even if principally it's music by Alan Silvestri.
So even if those names don't show up in the credit roll, just being able to say, I did additional music.
If you can prove it, if you're on Q Sheet or the industry knows it, or you have been the apprentice or the additional music person for a big name composer for a while, the hiring people, the music supervisors, they know that, or they know how to find that out. And so I don't think the stigma is there like it used to be. So, don't shy away from that work, ultimately, is what I'm saying. But you do have to, it is a business of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to make your own relationships. So, the directors and producers and people you meet on those big projects when you're the synth programmer or the additional music guy, those are not your relationships. That's your employer's relationships. You still have to build your own direct relationships with your own stories and your own independent films. And that takes time. That takes a long time. And ultimately, it's those relationships that are going to get you a career. Steven Spielberg, John Williams, Tim Burton, Danny Elfman, Robert Zemeckis, Alan Silvestri, even new ones like Ryan Coogler and Ludwig Göransson, they were roommates at college in USC, and he scored Ryan Coogler's student film. And lo and behold, that led to Fruitvale Station, which led to, Creed, which ultimately led to Black Panther, and Ludwig got an Oscar for it. Like, those relationships were him putting his time and efforts and support into the director of Tomorrow, which at the time would have been Ryan Coogler, and fostering that and building with that. And you kind of grow together throughout the industry. So,
yeah. Tell me a story about how a relationship really helped open a door for you or made a big difference in your career.
Again, business of relationships. I mean, my very first feature film I scored was a film called 9/10 in about 2003, 2004, something like that. I was pretty fresh out of USC at the time. And through a series of events, my cousin in Texas lived across the street from this woman who they went to church with. And that woman had a daughter who was in LA writing a script for a film. And somehow we got connected to talk. I got to talk with the daughter through my cousin's neighbor, right? And, I didn't think anything was going to come of it. And I sent her my music at the time and I didn't hear from her for 3 months. And then all of a sudden I get a call back from Bob Degas, who was the director of the film. And I go look up Bob. He produced Pleasantville. He was a New Line executive for many years. And this was his first directed feature. And he was married to Michelle, who was the daughter of the woman in Texas. Like, it was just this weird relationship. And that turned into, many projects at the outset of my career. I mean, I can trace almost everything back to that or someone I met through that. It was a really good working relationship for a while. So, I think one thing certainly needs to the next, and that came out of nowhere. There's no way you can predict that. You just have to kind of follow these things, follow these introductions, and don't take anybody you meet for granted because they might be the assistant to the agent or someone working in the mailroom today. 4 years from now, they're all of a sudden an executive in charge of production at something. Everybody works their way up from the mailroom. So
yep.
You never want to burn a bridge, and you never know who might be your employer. And, that's such an important part of this business is going to social events and meeting people and going to film festivals. And you're probably not going to get the job because you blindly send an email out to somebody asking, do you need a composer? You'll probably get the job because you met some director or producer at an event and they thought you were cool and you didn't even talk about work,
Yeah. Oh, it's very true. I get asked a lot about how to network properly. And most of it is just showing up.
Yeah.
And you have to be where those people are. So in that light, do you think it's critical for a film composer to be located in LA?
I personally still do, at least in the outset of your career, because I think post-production is done here for the most part. They go and shoot that movie all over the world or in any state in this country. Then ultimately they come back to LA to edit it and put it together and make a film out of it. So in my opinion, you have to have some connection to Los Angeles. Do you need to live in Los Angeles? I think it's easier in this day and age to not live in LA and have a connection to LA. So I would almost suggest to somebody, save your money, come out to LA for a year, build some contacts, build some relationships, go back to wherever you are and keep those relationships up, Get a Southern California phone number. People won't know that you left.
You can just do that on a Google phone right now.
Yeah, go to Google Voice, get, a Google Voice number with a Southern California area code, have that ring through to your mobile number, and people will see your phone number. I mean, it's such a big metropolitan area. And if you need to fly in for a meeting that's important, fly in for the meeting that's important. Have a Skype meeting if you need to have a Skype meeting. There's a lot of people that successfully have careers that they don't really need to meet face to face. I have a sound designer friend who for 2 years left LA and had an opportunity to house sit in an amazing house down in San Diego for someone. And she's like, I have to go down there. It's going to be free for me and I can save all this money and yet still do my work. She went down to San Diego, house sat. No one knew she left. And then yes, that's only 2 hours away from LA, but when she needed to mix on a film, she would drive up and she would stay with friends or stay in an Airbnb or something like that. And she would, drive back to her base in San Diego where most of her work was done at her home studio. And she made it work. And people didn't even know she left.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely possible, but you have to work at it. If you're just sitting around in some Midwest state, that's not really where things happen. It kind of happens maybe around the universities, maybe film programs or whatever, but you kind of have to go where things happen, at least to build the relationships.
Right.
They need FaceTime. They need to see you.
Well, it's the whole like, know, and trust issue, right?
Yep.
We don't do business or buy things from people we don't like, know, and trust.
Yep.
Unless they meet you, they're not going to know you.
Yep.
And they're not going to like you if they don't know you.
Yeah. And so much about working with someone too is it's about the hang.
Yeah.
It's like, do you enjoy being in a room with this person for 3 months, hashing it out? Directors coming over and just sitting with you while you go through cues, and they enjoy that process.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't do that with you and get to know you and build that rapport with you, they're going to pick somebody else. It's hard to do that remotely. If you've already established it, you might be able to do it remotely.
Yeah.
But to establish it from someone you don't know, it's next to impossible, in my opinion.
I would agree. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your podcast, because I'm not sure all my listeners are aware of it. So tell us about that.
Scorecast Online is a podcast that we bill as by composers for composers. It is all about the inside baseball of composing. We are not afraid to get geeky and technical and talk about plugins and DAWs and all that other stuff. It used to be Dean Ogden and I hosting. Dean has left the show. He did it for many years. He started Scorecast, but he's really gotten out of composing and gone back to drumming. Been drumming for Kelly Clarkson and David Foster and a lot of other stuff. So pretty much I am now the host of the show. I do want to have a co-host at some point, but I'm just not there yet. And picking somebody that has to be a good rapport, because I think the banter back and forth is important. It makes it engaging to listen to. And Dean and I always made each other laugh, and I think that was engaging. Having said that, all the shows we have a guest on. Our last show, we covered the NAMM show and products that were released. Scorecast covers it as media. We have press passes for the NAMM show. And I had Damon Tedesco on, who is a recording engineer and score recordist at the Fox Stage in Los Angeles. And Damon's also a friend of mine. He also teaches at UCLA Extension, engineering stuff. And so Damon and I did a show together, not only talking about the NAMM show, but just talking about our industry in general, and probe Damon a little bit about what he does. And my hope is on that show to start bringing in more people from other aspects of our business that composers, relate to. So we've had composer guests on the past, like Chris Lennertz and Charlie Clouser, and even Richard Bellis. And I've had Jim Henriksen, James Horner's music editor on Avatar, came by when Avatar got released, and we talked about that whole process. But now I want to start having producers and directors and music editors and other people on, so we can talk about the business side and philosophical side of what composers do as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I do in my UCLA class, and I feel it would make it an interesting progression for the show to handle as well. So
yeah, that's great. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, scorecastonline.com is where they can find it, and then whatever they listen to podcasts on, they'll find it there and they can subscribe to it. So we don't do a regular show, probably is not as regular as you can, because it's kind of dependent on my schedule and our schedule and the guest schedule. So, sometimes many months have gone by when we haven't released a show. And sometimes, things are working right and schedules work out and we all of a sudden do a show every month. So
yeah. Well, you got to do what you can. I mean, your main gig is to write music, right? So
exactly.
When you're writing music, you got to write music.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Brian. This has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you sharing your stories and everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It was great talking with you.
This episode of the Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in two versions, Dorico Pro for professionals and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.